Kenya has never had a car of its own until Mobius Motors.
Local manufacturers in the automotive industry are taking up the space. Mobius Motors is now not only assembling vehicles but also manufacturing cars targeting the Kenyan consumer with features aligned to the Kenyan terrain.
It all started in a tiny shed in Kilifi with one man, Joel Jackson, and one impossible idea: to build a car that could survive our rough roads, dusty villages, and rural trades. No luxury, no gadgets, just strength, simplicity, and purpose. People laughed. Skeptics said it won't work. But Jackson and his small team pushed forward, designing prototypes that looked strange but could handle anything Kenya threw at them. From Mombasa to Nairobi, from every breakthroughs to financial struggles, tax battles with the KRA, and almost closing its doors, Mobius refused to give up. And just when it seemed the dream was over, foreign investors stepped in, giving the company a second chance.
Kenyan car assembler Mobius Motors is back in business after being acquired by Middle Eastern investment firm Silverbox.
This is the story of Mobius Motors, Kenya's bold attempt to build a homegrown car, the fight to survive, and the man who dared to dream big. In 2010, Joel Jackson arrived in Kenya and noticed something strange. There were cars everywhere, but they didn't seem to belong. Most of them were imported used vehicles from places like Japan and Europe, built for smooth highways and predictable environments. But here, the reality was completely different. Roads were rough, dusty, and full of potholes, and these cars struggled to keep up. They broke more often than expected, spare parts were expensive or hard to find, and maintenance became a constant burden. For many people, owning a car wasn't making life easier, it was creating problems. Yet despite all this, the situation became normal. People had simply adapted to using machines that were never designed for their environment. During that visit, Jackson recognized a deeper need, not just for transportation, but for a rugged and affordable vehicle that could actually improve mobility, especially in rural areas where conditions were even tougher. Joel Jackson saw it differently. Instead of accepting it, he asked a simple but powerful question: why are Africans using cars that were never designed for Africa? That question became the foundation of something much bigger. In 2010, he founded Mobius Motors, formerly incorporated in the United Kingdom, that same year, and later registered in Kenya in 2011 as Mobius Motors Kenya Limited, a vehicle reassembler with an ambitious vision. What started as an idea quickly turned into action. Jackson formed a small team, and over the course of about 10 months, they focused on research and development, working to turn this concept into something real. In the early days, the company operated out of a small shed in Kilifi, along the Kenyan coast, a modest beginning of what aimed to become a disruptive force in the automotive industry. Before securing external funding in 2012, Jackson largely bootstrapped the company's operations, pushing forward with limited resources but a clear sense of direction. As the idea grew, the company moved operations from Kilifi to Mombasa and eventually to Nairobi, where its headquarters and showrooms were later established at Samia Business Park along Mombasa Road. Despite the challenges, Mobius pushed forward. The company managed to raise significant funding over time, close to $50 million. That's about 7.65 billion Kenyan shillings, but even that came with pressure. Building cars is one of the most capital-intensive industries in the world, and Mobius couldn't afford to compete with global brands on luxury or advanced technology. So they made a strategic decision to go in the opposite direction. Instead of adding more features, they started removing them. They stripped the vehicle down to its essentials: no expensive electronics, no unnecessary interior finishes, no complex systems that would be difficult to repair. What they focused on instead was durability, simplicity, and practicality. The goal was not to impress customers with comfort, but to give them something that actually worked in real conditions. The early development of their first prototype also taught them an important lesson. By using simplified designs and smart use of off-the-shelf components, they could keep development costs low while still achieving performance where it mattered the most. By 2014, this philosophy came to life with the release of the Mobius 1 prototype. It was raw and extremely basic, almost at the point of looking unfinished. It had no doors, no windows, and very minimal design elements. At first glance, it didn't look like a car that could compete with anything on the market. But that wasn't its purpose. The Mobius One was built to prove a point that a locally designed vehicle could survive the harsh conditions that destroyed most imported cars. And in that sense, it succeeded. It handled rough terrain with ease and began to attract attention, not because of how it looked, but because of what it represented. Most importantly, it provided valuable learning for the company, shaping future designs and reinforcing the importance of simplicity and function over everything else. However, providing an idea is very different from building a successful business. Mobius still had to turn that concept into a product people would actually buy. That moment came in 2015 with the launch of the Mobius 2, the company's first real production vehicle. This version was more complete and practical, designed for everyday use, while still maintaining the core principles of simplicity and durability. It was priced at around 950,000 Kenyan shillings, making it one of the most affordable new cars on the market at that time. It offered high ground clearance, a strong suspension system, and a design that allowed for easy repair using basic tools, which made it especially appealing in areas where access to specialized mechanics was limited. Even so, entering the market brought a new set of challenges. Customers were hesitant. The brand was new, and trust takes time to build, especially when it comes to something as important as a car. At the same time, Mobius itself was still trying to stabilize its operations. Production capacity was limited, supply chains were still being developed, and the pressure inside the company was growing. Engineers were working to refine the product, management was trying to balance vision with financial survival, and investors were watching closely, expecting results. Mobius had managed to do something that very few believed was possible. It had built a car in Kenya for Kenya. But now, the real challenge had begun, convincing people that it was worth believing in. But before we continue, if you find this video interesting, make sure to like and subscribe for more captivating stories. By 2016, Mobius Motors was no longer just an idea, it was a company people were starting to notice. The Mobius 2 had entered the market, and while it wasn't perfect, it had something most vehicles didn't. It was built with the African condition in mind. Slowly, interest began to grow, not from everyone, but from the right kind of customers, business owners, NGOs, farmers, and transport operators who need reliability more than luxury. For them, Mobius 2 wasn't just a car, it was a tool. It could handle rough roads, carry heavy loads, and operate in areas where most vehicles struggled. In a market flooded with second-hand imports, Mobius stood out as something different, something local, something purposeful. But growth brought pressure. What worked at small scale quickly became difficult to manage as demand increased. Building a few vehicles is one thing, building hundreds or thousands is something else entirely. Mobius began to face the realities of manufacturing. Supply chains had to be consistent, parts had to arrive on time, quality had to be maintained, and all of this required money, coordination, and experience. Delays started to appear, costs began to rise, and internally, the company had to make tough decisions about how to scale without losing control of its vision. At the same time, Mobius was trying to shift how people perceived its vehicles. While durability was its biggest strength, perception was becoming a challenge. Many customers still compared it to imported SUVs, expecting comfort, modern features, and brand recognition. To compete more effectively, Mobius knew it had to evolve. It couldn't stay too basic, but it also couldn't lose what made it unique. This led to one of the company's biggest strategic moves. Around 2018, Mobius began investing in its local assembly plant in Nairobi, aiming to increase production capacity and reduce reliance on external processes. It was a bold step toward becoming a true manufacturer rather than assembler. The goal was to produce vehicles at a scale, potentially thousands per year, and lower long-term costs through local production. But this expansion came with significant pressure. Building and operating a plant required capital, precision, and efficiency, and any mistake at that level could be costly. Then, in 2019, Mobius introduced Mobius 3, a more refined version of its earlier model. This was a major turning point. The company had listened to feedback and made improvements, adding features like power steering, a more comfortable interior, and better handling. The design was still simple and rugged, but it was now more appealing to a wider audience. It felt less like an experiment and more like a complete product. However, improvement came at a cost. The price of the Mobius 3 rose to around 1.3 million Kenyan shillings, bringing it closer to the price of used imported SUVs. It now had to convince customers that its value was worth choosing over more familiar brands. It wasn't about durability anymore. It was about trust, perception, and overall experience. And just as the company was trying to find its balance, the world changed. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted everything. Supply chains slowed down or stopped completely. Demand dropped as economic uncertainty grew. Businesses delayed purchases, and like many companies around the world, Mobius found itself under serious financial strain. Cash flow became tighter, operations slowed, and plans had to be reconsidered. Inside the company, the pressure intensified. Teams that had focused on growth were now focused on survival. Every decision mattered more. Every delay felt heavier. The vision was still there, but the path forward was becoming complicated. Mobius had proven that it could build a car. It had shown that there was market for it. But now, it was facing a different kind of challenge, not building the future, but sustaining it. By 2021, Mobius Motors had reached a point where belief was no longer enough. The company had spent years proving that it was possible to design and build a vehicle for African conditions, but now it was facing the harder reality of sustaining that vision in highly competitive and capital-intensive industry. Alongside market pressures, the company was drawn into a significant tax dispute with the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, a conflict that will strain its finances for years. The KRA issued a demand of around 73 million Kenyan shillings, later contested by the company, and Mobius found itself defending its financial position in court while trying to keep operation alive, further stretching already thin resources. The challenges that had been building over time, declining sales, rising debts, supply chain disruptions, and stiff competition from imported vehicles were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Even though Mobius had created a product that worked, turning that product into a consistently profitable business proved far more complicated. Internally, the focus began to shift from expansion toward survival as management worked to stabilize operations and find a viable path forward under mounting pressure. This was a period when the dream of building a sustainable automotive business in Kenya began to collide with the harsh economic realities, and the company's leadership had to navigate both market forces and financial liabilities threatened to overwhelm them. During this period, changes began to happen to leadership level. Founders and key executives began transitioning roles, reflecting the need of a different kind of leadership, one focused not just on vision, but on operational efficiency and financial discipline. For employees, technicians, and factory workers who had poured years into building something groundbreaking now faced an unpredictable future as production slowed and new vehicles orders stalled. Production targets became harder to meet, and maintaining a steady output remained a challenge. Despite these pressures, Mobius still had supporters who believed that local vehicle manufacturing could anchor emerging sector in East Africa. However, the financial pressure did not disappear, and by August 5, 2024, it had reached a breaking point. At a shareholders meeting in Nairobi, the company's board resolved to place Mobius Motors Kenya Limited into voluntary liquidation, appointing SVSK Satari as liquidator under Kenya's Insolvency Act, making what seemed the final chapter in the company's history after a more than a decade of effort and investment. But in a turn of events that surprised many observers and supporters, the story didn't end there. Shortly after liquidation announcement, on August 14, 2024, Mobius disclosed that it had accepted an acquisition offer for 100% of its shares from an undisclosed investor, postponing the creditors' meeting and opening the door for possible comeback. The investor later emerged as Silverbox, a Middle East-based investment and technology firm that saw value in Mobius' legacy, its production infrastructure in Nairobi, and its potential to contribute to Africa's automotive future. Regulatory approval followed, with the Competition Authority of Kenya greenlighting the acquisition in October 2024 after determining that the combined assets of Mobius and Silverbox did not pose competition risks. Under the new leadership, the company began to revive operations, reopening its service center in Nairobi, appointing John Kavila as Chief Operating Officer, and planning to restart the full-scale production of the Mobius 3 model by July 2025, while preparing to launch an entirely new off-road SUV model by the end of the year. Mobius Motors may have struggled to survive on its own, but its story continues. The demand for rugged, affordable, and locally supported vehicles in Africa still exists, and under its new ownership, Mobius might finally be on a path not just to survive, but to grow.